The Porsche 911 is an automotive blank canvas, a car capable of being moulded to match almost any conceivable scenario. Just look at the disparate options offered by the factory, from Carrera to Dakar to Targa to GT3 RS. But outside the gates of Weissach, some people have always taken things even further.
This has got a Formula 1 engine in it, one that spits flames.
And this one sends 700 turbocharged horsepower to the rear wheels through a manual gearbox. These are outrageous.
This is a Ruf CTR, which means that whilst it might look relatively, well, normal in 911 terms, apart from its fantastic paint job, it is actually quite extraordinary. It has a full carbon fibre body, but the most amazing thing is that underneath it is a full carbon fibre chassis with inboard suspension. There is, of course, a monstrous flat six turbocharged in the back, because this is the modern incarnation of the wild child original CTR, the Yellowbird. And this is a 930 TAG turbo, one of just 11 cars built by Lanzante, and yes, it does have a genuine 1980s McLaren Formula 1 engine in the back. This is AP87, meaning it was raced by Alain Prost 3 times.
Wearing their matching shades of mint green, paint code 22R if you're interested, they make for quite the pair. Both cars are currently consigned with Broad Arrow in the UK, and we've brought them to Anglesey for a bit of a leg stretch and a shakedown.
Start with this, really, and it's a surprising car because, well, for a start, it just starts. You might think that it would be, well, a bit of a diva. There would be all sorts of history on it. You'd have to have a team of mechanics following it around just to start it up, but no, it just starts on the key. No, it's not terribly happy when it's first started up and it's cold. It needs warming up like any high-performance engine, same with the gearbox. But essentially, there's nothing to it. The next thing you notice is just how drivable it is. It's not docile, certainly not. But once you've tuned into it, it really likes to be revved. It doesn't feel laggy. It's amazing. It's a bit like the engine in the GMA T50, another amazing engine that reminds me of an F1 engine, in that you need to tune into it, understand how the throttle blips. It's quite a sort of firm throttle. Understand how it revs so you can get those heel and toes just right. Perhaps the trickiest thing to get used to is the clutch, because it's a very short travel on it. Hear the pops, you know it's flaming out the back.
And throwing the flames out of the Inconel and titanium exhaust is a TTE P01 engine, a 1.5 litre twin turbocharged V6. And although it was raced in a McLaren, it was designed in Stuttgart.
McLaren in 1981 was still using a Cosworth DFV, a naturally aspirated engine, when everyone else in Formula 1 was switching to turbochargers. But Ron Dennis realised that he wasn't going to get an engine from one of the existing suppliers, so he went to Porsche. Porsche was obviously very successful at Le Mans at the time, and they said, yes, sure, we'll build you an engine, but you've got to pay for it. And that's where TAG comes in.
An acronym for Technique d'Avant-Garde, TAG was run by Mansour, and over the years it has been involved with aviation and perhaps most famously watches. But in the early 80s, as part of this engine deal, Ron Dennis offered Mansour the chance to take 50% ownership of McLaren, and TAG remained involved in the company for over 40 years. The tiny turbo engine with their name on it was a remarkable piece of engineering for the time. Not only small and powerful, but also, unlike some of the others, reliable, with incredibly intricate cooling channels, titanium conrods, forged pistons by Mahler, sodium-filled valves and Nickesil liners for the cylinders. Where it gets really interesting for us is that before the engine was put into an F1 car, Porsche needed to do some testing, so they put it into a 930 turbo road car, and the TAG Turbo was born. That test mule remained a one-off for many years, until 2017, when Lanzante met with Zak Brown. Initially they asked if they could buy the original, but then struck a deal to buy a small number of race engines and create 11 new cars.
When it went into F1 in 1983, it had about 600 brake horsepower, revved to 11,500 RPM, and had 4 bar of boost. By the end, in 1987, in full qualifying trim, we put out over 1,000 brake horsepower. Cosworth and Lanzante have done an amazing job to make this so drivable. This is putting out 510 brake horsepower, 310 pounds-feet of torque, revs to 9,000 RPM, and has 3 bar of boost. If you think, oh, well, that's a bit down on that qualifying trim, trust me, it still feels like an awful lot in this car. The gearbox is not from a 930, it's from a later 993, so it's a G50-20 gearbox. And again, Lanzante's paid real attention to the shift weighting in it. It's a beautiful box to use. The weighting across the gate is fabulous. I'm amazed that there's not huge amounts of lag in this. You can feel when the turbos really spool up. Triple K turbos, used for their reliability compared to Garrett at the time. But it's a really drivable engine. You can work with it. You're not afraid of the boosts at all. I love that. And I just love the idea that Alain Prost's right foot controlled this engine, duking it out with Nigel Mansell and Ayrton Senna and others.
This engine, number 51, raced in Germany in 1986 and Hungary and Japan in 87, with a podium finish in Budapest.
There is, of course, one person I haven't mentioned who connects this engine with the one in the roof, Hans Metzger.
The legendary Porsche engineer who masterminded the incredible 917 race car also designed this F1 V6 that helped McLaren win 26 races, 3 drivers' titles and 2 constructors' championships. However, Metzger is undoubtedly best known for his iconic Flat Six that debuted in the 911 in 1963 and lasted nearly half a century.
The era of the Metzger engine came to an end in regular 911s with the introduction of the 996 and the M96 engine, which was water-cooled. However, the high-performance engines in the turbocharged cars and the racing department, things like the GT3, well, that carried on with the Metzger. And this 3.6 litre engine in this Ruf CTR is very definitely a Metzger engine. And do not underestimate it. No, this might not have an engine dripping with Formula 1 history, but boy is it strong. 700 brake horsepower, 649 pounds-feet of torque from just 2,750 RPM. So that's nearly 200 brake horsepower more than in the TAG, and obviously over twice the torque. Unsurprising, as this is 3.6 litres as opposed to 1.5. This is an absolute animal in a straight line. So much more demonstrably turbocharged. Not laggy, just fearsome. To give you some context, the 991 Gen 2 GT2 RS, which was considered, well, quite a monster, that had 690 brake horsepower and 100 pounds-feet less of torque. Oh, and it weighed about 200 kilos more, and it didn't have a manual box. This is a proper wild child. I thought it's worth taking just a minute to compare these two 6-cylinder engines and their different layouts, because this is obviously flat and this is a V. And this is a genuine flat engine. It's not a 180-degree V. What makes it that? Well, each piston in a pair of opposing pistons has its own crank pin. That means that they both hit bottom dead center at the same time, which means they come together like a pair of boxing gloves, hence boxer engine. This means it has very good primary and secondary balance. Also being flat, it obviously has a nice low center of gravity. In fact, Hans Metzger wanted to put a flat engine into the Formula 1 car, but John Barnard at McLaren said no. Why? Because obviously, well, a V engine does that, so it's not as well balanced, but it is better for packaging because this is an 80-degree V, so it's nice and small, and obviously that helps in terms of aerodynamics. Now, one thing I hadn't expected with these engines is the sound, because I thought this wouldn't sound like a 911 anymore. But weirdly, it actually sounds quite like a boxer engine. Love those turbocharged sounds. Interestingly, this has a 7-speed manual, but it feels nicer than the 7 speeds that I've got used to in 991s and 992s. This in fact also has a link to 1987, because the original CTR did a test at Anglesey, the famous test track. It was all about top speed, and it set an amazing top speed of 211 miles an hour. The second place car, a Porsche 959, then very new, and it only managed 196. Today, this is good for 223 apparently. I can well believe it.
However, it's not all about the drivetrain and cannonball straight line performance.
Obviously the big thing with this is the chassis though. This carbon fibre monocoque that you can see as soon as you get in here. And it's worth mentioning that the interior of this is just beautiful. The finishing on it is exemplary. I love all the little mint green touches, the piping along there, the exposed carbon fibre. It's a gorgeous place to be. One quirk of the carbon fibre chassis is that you do tend to sit quite high. Certainly if you're sort of tall like me, you feel like you sit on top of the chassis a bit.
That carbon monocoque isn't the only unusual thing to find hiding under a traditional 911 shape either, as there are double wishbones all round, and the distinctive yellow and purple KW springs and dampers are mounted inboard, laterally at the rear, longitudinally at the front, with 2 damper modes to switch between. The ride has real depth to it, with a plushness that, combined with a longer wheelbase, leaves you in mind of a more grand GT than a sports car at times.
If you thought the age of the scary 911 was over, just drive one of these in the wet. What an absolutely unhinged thing this is. All those Star Wars sounds from the turbo.
The CTR felt like a real handful in the wet initially, with all that torque on tap. But although it would break traction with the ease of a hot chainsaw through butter, it was actually relatively benign once it was over the limit and sliding.
It's not brimming with feedback through the steering wheel, so you need to build confidence with it, but once you do, actually, it's really nice over the limit. It can go fairly easily Compared to the Tag, it's so much lighter in all its controls. What's extraordinary is that this feels utterly extreme in some respects, but also amazingly usable, something that you'd love to live with. Does it feel like a 911 because of this chassis? Yes, in terms of you get a bit of push at the front, but you can feel the extra wheelbase in it. It feels much more modern, and everything, like I say, just feels so smooth.
It's a real Jekyll and Hyde of a car, both extreme and easy, like whitewater rafting in an armchair.
As I felt with the naturally aspirated version of this car, you can see it being almost the one-car garage doing everything, because you really could use this every day. It rides so well, but also it gives you all the thrills. On a day like today, you really do feel like you're walking on eggshells, with all that power and torque going to the rear wheels. Yeah, that's giving the traction control a workout. And me. Right, time to go and calm down, relax a little, and drive a 911 with an F1 engine in it again. Getting back into this Tag turbo, you notice how much sort of more old school it feels in here. Big steering wheel, it feels like a 930. Obviously a few little differences with things like, well, a rev counter that goes all the way to 10,000 RPM and a water temperature gauge as well, which you wouldn't expect to find in a 930, obviously. I like the fact that this is sort of so everyday in here. These seats are the standard spec, the sort of the more comfort orientated ones. You can get sportier Recaros, but that means deleting the rear seats, and I love these. They feel like they hold you well and they're so comfortable. The chassis on this is changed, so we haven't got torsion bar rear suspension like an original. We've got coilovers back there and retuned front suspension. I love the stance of this car as well. Lots of rake, really nose forwards. The other thing that's really interesting about this, and relates to the engine but affects the chassis and the handling, is the fact that the engine back there weighs just 130 kilos. The weight balance is obviously still out the back, but there's just less of it, so it just feels better balanced. And it's so light, this, with its carbon fibre body panels, alloy doors.
Those panels and doors shed over 50 kilos from the standard 930 turbo, and the lightweight lithium-ion battery and new mil-spec wiring loom shave another 27 kilos. Dripping wet, Lanzante says that a Tag turbo tips the scales at just 1,020 kilos, or 2,250 pounds.
I think it could be sort of cartoonish and unruly, but it's got fabulous amounts of traction. You would swear that actually it had bigger rear tyres, partly because when you look at them, those 40 profile tyres look bigger than 255s at the rear. But it's got really good rear traction. You can just work with the front end like you'd expect in an old 911. So a little bit of understeer, but that's nice. It just means you can play with it, lean on it. Beautifully weighted steering, even in the wet. This is such a confidence-inspiring car to drive. It's full of feel through the steering, the pedals. The balance is just there. This is on Trofeo R tyres, so not ideal for these conditions at all. And yet it still feels really friendly through this corner here. So you just feel a little bit of push mid-corner, and then you can balance it on the exit. That's a turbocharged F1 engine. It's so progressive, so usable. That demonstrates just how well tuned this car is. It's so different to the Ruf, and it's definitely so much louder in here. Too loud? I don't think so, because you just wouldn't get bored of this sound. It gets more and more F1 the further up in the revs you get. And then you hear the pops, and you know it's flaming, and you have those downshifts which connect you to it. Oh, what a thing. I'd half expected this to feel a bit one-dimensional, caricaturish with that F1 engine in the back, but not at all. All the details have been really thought about, sweated over, which means you just have the all-round package, usable, drivable, full of character. I love it. Does it still feel like a 911, despite the fact it's got a V6 in the back? Yes. Yes, it does still feel like a 911. And what's more, it feels like one of the very best.
What I really love about these cars is that they are wolves wearing the wardrobe of a sheep. A sharply dressed sheep, granted, but these cars are still nicely understated by supercar standards. I adore the mint green paint, but if you swapped it out for oak or moss green, you'd have a couple of real sleepers. I think that's super cool. It's part of the charm of the 911 shape. Even though the CTR and the Tag are truly extreme, they still look like they're not that far from the original blank canvas.